Yeah, I'm already rolling. I've just started rolling.
Okay, then. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Resistance United Great Britain again. We have the mighty Lloyd de Jong, and this time it's not going to be about Islam after about 10 episodes. We are going to start the discussion about Judaism and the Talmud, and tonight he is going to start with the Covenant of Noah. So, Lloyd, as usual, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for coming and for what you're doing for us and for the world.
Excellent, thank you. Let me see if I have a full screen option. You mind there is no full screen option. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. So we've had, as Harry said, about 10 episodes covering Islam, especially going through Islamic law. So we did not focus on the Quran and the Hadith. This was not the point of the discussion. We went through Islamic law, which is the final product of the understanding and interpretation of the Islamic sources like the Quran and the Hadith. And so we saw what is commonly known as the Sharia and the Fiqh. So we went through that in extreme detail, I think. And we also covered Islam's very intimate connections to the Nazis, their assistance to the Nazis in World War II, the very close parallels and ties with the Palestinians and the Nazis. And then, of course, we covered Islam's ties to the occult, something that is typically attributed and blamed upon the Jews, but at least one historical source says that the people that originally made this connection actually found Arabic script, thought it was Hebrew script, and then blamed the Jews as opposed to blaming the the Arabs, the Muslims. And what they found was the Templars had access to various Islamic Gnostic sources. And of course, yes, we discussed Islamic Gnosticism. This is not something that Muslim scholars hide, but it's something that is not spoken about because Islam is and does explicitly claim to be within its Islamic law a Gnostic religion. Okay. However, tonight we're going to be talking about Judaism and the Old Testament. So we're going to be talking about the Covenant of Noah. Now, various hysterical people will commonly use the Noahide laws. The Jews are going to eat your babies and drink their blood and enslave you under the Covenant of Noah. Right? This is a bunch of hysteria. I'll be talking about this in extreme detail tonight. If we don't finish, we'll continue next week. So we're going to be doing some historical work, but we're going to be going extensively through the Old Testament. Once I complete this discussion on the Covenant of Noah, which gives an underlying understanding of the Old Testament exegesis by the old, from the Jewish perspective, and then we'll then have an understanding for moving deeper into the Talmud, because the Talmud obviously is derived from an understanding of the Torah. So we'll be going extensively through Torah, Old Testament, which are not necessarily synonymous. Okay, so to start with, I usually like to start with something that is of, something funny, something amusing. So I wrote this on a comment 2 years ago to someone who was making lots of comments. They were saying, "Oh, the Jews have so much money, and the this and the that and please don't blame the Arabs. They're just poor people living in caves. They have no political influence. They have no money. They're just to be pitied and send them your last dinar now." So I have an entire presentation which I will do on this channel in the near future, probably early next year, discussing Islamic money, because one of the rules, if you want to follow what someone's doing, follow the money. So we at some point will follow Islamic money, compare that to the spend of Israeli money, and see if maybe the Arabs are floating on a bunch of oil and have tons more money than Israel will ever hope to have in its wildest imaginations. And of course, the answer is yes, they do. They have tons more money than Israel will ever make. And so that puts pay to the idea that these poor Arabs living in caves. But anyway, and also their political connections. We'll see about those, because somehow that never goes discussed. As you know, according to modern orthodoxy, you can only blame white people, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Jews. And, to legitimately point out violent crimes by Muslims or black people is apparently racist. So, moving on. The British royal family has an estimated net worth of $88 billion. Now, this is about 2 years old. Okay, this is about 2 years since I looked at this. This is according to business consultancy firm Brand Finance. that monarchy is far from being the richest royal family in the world. That distinction goes to the House of Saud, the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia. The House of Saud is estimated to be worth $1.4 trillion. This was a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, since I last dug into this. So for reference, that is like 16 times the British royal family's net worth. So now, why are we insisting that these Muslims have no money, no political influence, and so don't go on about the Muslims, don't go on about the Arabs, because I've been called a Mossad agent. Mossad, if you're listening, my checks are late. I'm owed years of checks. Please send them. You know the address. Then of course I've been called a Roman Catholic. I didn't know that was a rude thing, but whatever. I'm not a Roman Catholic. I've been called a white supremacist. Look at this face. I've been called a number of things, but anyway, so I'm neither a Jew, I'm not a Mossad agent, and I'm just someone who presents factual evidence that anyone can link to, and I provide literally every scrap of evidence that I have. It's all publicly available. This particular presentation is fully publicly available. The link should be provided to you. Ari has the details, and you can see literally every word that I'm going to speak is something that you are able to follow and read along for yourself. Okay. So anyway, so if the British royal family is like this, apparently they've got trillions and billions and gazillions of dollars. Well, the Saudi Arabians have much, much more. So why are they exempt from scrutiny? Are you shills for the Muslim Brotherhood? Are you shills for the Muslims? We've got to ask that question. So ranting aside, we're going to be speaking of the 7 laws of Noah. Right now, you might be familiar with the 10 Commandments. The 7 laws of Noah are a precursor to the 10 Commandments. So once I pointed this out, that 5 of the 10 Commandments are verbatim in the 7 laws of Noah, then I would ask these hysterical people who were screaming about how the 7 laws of Noah are there to enslave mankind and enslave your children and enable vampirism by Jews. And no, I'm not exaggerating. I'd say, well, then if 5 of those laws are verbatim in the 10 Commandments, does that make the 10 Commandments half evil? If the 7 laws of Noah are evil and 5 of them are in the 10 Commandments, are the 10 Commandments automatically 50% evil and satanic? And of course you get the normal response, the blank look and the mouth going, and then they'll start screaming about something else. Harry, your thoughts on that? If 5 of the laws of Noah are in the 10 Commandments, does that make the 10 Commandments half evil, half satanic?
On the contrary, it makes the Noah covenant very important.
Correct. It's the precursor. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
And legit, lawful.
Correct. And that is the conclusion that they're obviously seeking to avoid. And then I say, well, the 6th law of Noah is not to tear the flesh and tear the limbs off living animals. In other words, not to torture live animals or living things, and to drink their blood and eat their flesh. So not to rip an animal apart while it's alive and chew on its flesh raw and drink its blood. Now I think we can all agree that is pretty barbaric behavior, and I'll ask them, is that something that you're going to rail against? Because some of the laws of Noah are thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit murder, thou shalt not commit adultery. And I'll ask them, which of those laws do you object to, since they're in the laws of Noah, which are evil? Because the laws of Noah are evil, therefore thou shalt not murder must be evil. And then they'll look at me and they'll call me a racist. And then I'll say, well, okay, so the same rules are in the 10 Commandments. Are those evil and racist laws too? Just checking, asking for a friend. And of course then they'll complain eventually it's the last one, which says that mankind must establish courts of justice. Okay? And then they'll say it's the courts of justice they're going, but blah, blah. They've obviously never read St. Paul, they've never read the Book of Romans. But moving on. So let's start with the 7 laws of Noah. This is simply God's covenant with Noah. Right? So this is simply the covenant. God has made many covenants throughout the Old Testament. There's the New Covenant, there's the New Testament with Jesus in the New Testament. Then of course you've got the covenant with David, you've got the covenant with Abraham, you've got the covenant with Moses, you've got there are about 4 major covenants, 16 large covenants, I guess, and you've got numerous minor covenants. A covenant is an agreement, like a contract, but it's an agreement for a given time with a given person in a given geography. right? The laws of Noah, though, the covenant with Noah was a covenant with Noah at a given time, but it counts across all of the earth in this case. But we will get into all of that. So it's a legitimate understanding, it's a legitimate agreement between God and the human being, right? And of course, anyone who wants to try and make this out to be a satanic evil thing is obviously trying to undermine the Bible, and if they can undermine the Bible, they can undermine Christianity, undermine the Jews, and so on and so on. These are just people with their own agenda. So in Genesis 6:5, verses 5 and 11 to 13, we read, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts in his heart was only evil continually." In 11, we have the earth was corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. All flesh had corrupted their way on the earth, and God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So that's in the New King James Version. Now the 10 Commandments were not given, and they were not written yet. So a logical question based on the hysteria that I've actually seen, and I'm not kidding about the hysteria, it's actually quite sad that people are talking about these laws are evil. Clearly there was a law in effect. The 10 Commandments were not given to Moses yet. But clearly God is saying that people have violated some kind of law. They violated some, call it natural law if you will, but the people have violated some kind of law. So what laws had been broken that people were being judged at that time? So understand there were laws in effect. Now unfortunately the Book of Noah does have its vagaries. It's not entirely detailed. Of course we don't have 4K footage, we don't have GoPro footage of the events. So what happened was the rabbis at the time, right, the scholars had to sit and think, now had to do some exegesis. They had to try and do some extrapolation and some finding within other texts to try and imply, well, what actually is God talking about? What is explicit and what is implicit? Now the existence of laws in the book of Genesis and Exodus is evident, though there is no formal record of their delivery. So when they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. That's in Exodus 18 verse 16. So I make them know the statutes of God and his laws, but we don't have a record of these laws prior to the law of Moses. 1 John 3:4, "Whoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law." But what law? You see, the question is what law specifically is being transgressed? In Romans 7:7, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law, for I had not known lust, except the Lord said, Thou shalt not covet." Now, clearly some sort of law is being violated, and it's the law that pointed out that this is wrong, because sometimes your conscience doesn't kick in. Sometimes, we don't realize we're making a mistake. So again, the question would be, the logical question is, what law is being broken? Numbers 15. "One ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation and also for the stranger that sojourneth with you." Now this would generally be assumed to mean you have the Jews, that's the congregation, those are the people of God, and we can have that discussion or shouting match, whichever you want, about whether or not God still believes in the Jews. And then of course the stranger that sojourneth with you. This is generally exegeted by rabbis to mean Gentiles, non-Jews. Okay, and we can get into a shouting match over the meaning of Gentiles another time, but there will be plenty of opportunity for that, I assure you. And then of course I'll ask you if you work for the Muslim Brotherhood, because somehow you don't have a problem with the word kafir. Anyway, "An ordinance forever in your generations, as ye are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord." So, as you are, so shall the stranger, that would be the Gentiles, the non-Jews. "And one law and one manner shall be for you and for the stranger that sojourneth with you." So there shall be equal laws, okay, for you. So there's a certain set of laws that are common to both groups, right? The Jews are set apart within the Bible, but there's also a certain set of laws that are common to both. And again, one might think of this as natural law. Numbers 29:40, "And Moses told the children of Israel according to all that the Lord commanded Moses." But this is prior to the 10 Commandments. So what did Moses tell the children of Israel according to all that the Lord commanded Moses? But also what you have is that clearly, if you look at the 10 Commandments are a couple of slabs with 10 commandments or 10 statements, as they would be in the Hebrew. And God could have said, "Hey, look, Moses, here's a couple of slabs. I've chiseled this out. It took me all of like 8 minutes, and down you go. But Moses did spend 40 days up on Mount Sinai. Okay, so now, is God just a really slow writer? Does God chisel very, very slowly? Or, besides these 10 fundamental laws that were given to Moses, did they have lengthy discussions of numerous things that form the basis for tradition, like the 613 mitzvot, right? The additional laws that are found within the Torah, right? So now the flood proves that the cataclysm did not solve the problems that resides in the hearts of men, right? Even though all men were killed, people again reverted to their evil ways, right? So, but this means that the entire world had been so sinful that God decided to start over with a fresh start, but he also had a fresh approach. Okay, so now we've got Noah's story. Noah was a righteous man, and his attitude and conduct becomes our practical human example and spiritual guide. So I'm not trying to do a religious sermon here. I'm attempting to provide an understanding of the religious implications, the moral implications, and at least what I think is a reasonable, factual, and an orthodox understanding of what is meant by these events and how these are interpreted. I'm not going to go into great depth. I am no theologian, but at least what I say has backing from very well respected theologians and within the general realm of the church. So now, of course, as some would say, the flood of our times is not one of water, but an overwhelming flood of deception, combined with threats of violence against us. And I think this is very, very true. The author of this little piece here is John W. Rittenbaugh. And I think these are very prophetic words. Okay, we are facing a flood. Okay, and this is a man-made flood of deception and threats of violence. I think we're all going through that right now. Who knew that the cure for a disease happens to be communism? I was not aware of that. So, okay, Noah was one of the patriarchs of the Bible. The question being, who is Noah? Or who was Noah? Noah remained faithful to God despite the corruption around him. He was the only righteous representative of humanity worthy of being saved from God's judgment. And he was warned to build an ark. The other people saved with him were his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, 8 people in all. Now, sadly, we know virtually nothing about Noah's early days. The Bible only mentions that his father Lamech named him Noah, which means rest, because this one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed. All right? So Noah warned of a flood. Noah preached for 100 years during the building of the ark, and God patiently waited for any person to repent. However, none believed Noah or wanted to follow God. They continued in their evil ways until they were all wiped out. So I'll pause there. Any comment, Harry, before I go on?
No, it's very clear. Would you like me to see if there are any questions? Or
Yeah, of
maybe we
course, if
should
there's
continue?
anything, yeah.
Okay. Guys, any questions? If you do, yeah.
Nathan has a
has one.
question, yeah.
Go ahead, my friend.
I
Nathan?
just got on now. I just want to know what the subject is.
The laws of Noah, the Noahide laws.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a subject that on my time on Jan's channel would cause people to lose their tiny little minds. I was amazed how people lost their minds over this.
I'm Jewish, by the way.
Yeah, I figured as
I
much.
can understand this information well.
Yeah, no. So yeah, forgive my sarcasm because there's going to be plenty of that flying around today. But I had numerous heavy run-ins with people who clearly had no idea what they were talking about, but just had minds full of garbage. Okay, so now we need to get into context: the righteous and the wicked. Now we're talking about Cain.
Lloyd,
yes.
We have another question or comment.
Sure.
If I can. 1 second, it disappeared. It was George. 1 second. Yeah, George Orwell. What a name. You can go ahead. Go ahead, Lloyd.
All right.
Sorry.
So now, the Bible describes there are 2 lines arising from what we might call our first parents, right? So after the flood, you've got, according to the biblical narrative, you've got Noah, right? And all of us are the descendants, the sons of Noah. Right, so now you've got the Bible describes two lines arising from our first parents, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve's first two sons had much more than the usual sibling rivalry. Abel was the righteous son who strived to please God. Cain grew jealous of Abel's favor with God and murdered him. So Cain knew that he had sinned. Now, of course, again, we don't have a record of what these laws were that Adam and Eve lived under. Right, the Ten Commandments were not written yet. So what was the law? So clearly there was some kind of law, a known law, which a standard against which this could be judged and found to be wanting. So Cain knew that he had sinned. The children of Adam and Eve knew that sin was the breaking of God's law, else God would not have held them accountable. Cain was banished, and Seth, Eve's next son, continued the righteous line of Adam and Eve. And then for quite a while the two lines never met, but they continued to live apart. However, eventually the righteous line, the sons of God, found the unrighteous lines of Cain, the daughters of men, to be beautiful and started marrying them. The result was that the godly line of Seth became morally corrupted through the influence of their ungodly wives, which is why the Bible warns against being unequally yoked. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil. That's Genesis 6:5. It also says in 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be bound together, unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? What fellowship has light with darkness? Right, so that's a New Testament sort of paraphrase of this. Right, and the original Greek word translated bound together or unequally yoked is heterozygeo, which is a compound word from blah blah blah, meaning opposed. Okay, you cannot join things which are opposed. Right, so in other words, if things are opposed, if you've got ideologies, ideas, moral systems, standards that are opposed, if they're pulling apart in different directions or they're clashing, then of course you cannot be joined to this. You need to be separated from it. You have to go on your own. You need to be joined with those things which are moving or pulling in the same direction. Right? So in metaphorical terms, it refers to individuals being part of a team to accomplish some goal. This is like the crazy Democrats and the lame Republicans. I mean, they're clearly not on the same team anymore. Right? They're definitely not on Team America. You've got the Democrats on Team USSR or whatever they're on, Team China. And of course the lame duck Republicans. But moving on, one of the descendants of Cain, Lamech, bragged to his wife that he had killed both a man and a boy in fights. The corruption of mankind became so great that the thoughts of his heart was only evil. However, human beings didn't stop at just thinking evil thoughts. They acted on those thoughts and filled the world with violence. So this was the background, this was the context that we've been given for the evil that was occurring. So Noah is known for righteousness within this context of the world, this evil, violent world. And the world had turned against God, so they turned against the moral law of God. However, Noah was not morally perfect. After the flood, Noah planted a vineyard, he made wine, he got drunk, and he passed out naked in his tent. Okay? Now, like all other believers, Noah's... Oh, by the way, this is a fairly... I guess it's a little bit of a one-off. And I know it annoys people and it frustrates people, but I may as well just hit this push this button again. Martin Luther, I keep hearing from Protestants, and I'm a Protestant, I grew up Protestant in the Anglican Church, as I said before, right? They say that Martin Luther did evil, and Martin Luther did wrong, and Martin Luther this, and Martin Luther that. And it's interesting that there's so many times people are prefacing what Martin Luther, that he was evil and did wrong, and yet when I ask, well, give me specifics, what did he do wrong? Somehow this gets avoided. So, for those who want to tell me about that, please be more specific, because one day I'm going to be very specific, and that's not going to work out well. So here you've got Noah making, I guess maybe this was a once-off, I don't know if he did this on a continuous basis, all right? But like all other believers, Noah's righteousness was the result of his faith in God. Now, he was not a perfect man, but he certainly was not an evil man. So, not just the outward representation of the faith, which sometimes fails. So, all others had abandoned their belief in God. Now, which means that there were certain things that he did wrong, which were forgivable, but there are certain things that he consistently did correctly, which obviously made him righteous. There were certain things about him that made him righteous. So, Noah stood firm in faith, and he's recognized as one of the great examples of faith in the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, the great chapter on faith. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Now, the ark of Noah is a symbol for God's ultimate work, which can save everybody, right? So, moving on from that, now, Christians and Jews recognize Noah as a great man of God, a righteous man, and he remained faithful to his calling, and he avoided lawlessness and corruption by following a God-given set of rules. So this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. So we have from the Bible, he was a righteous man. He followed certain rules. He was righteous. What made him righteous? Right? The earth was corrupt, but Noah was righteous. So now God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all flesh. The earth is filled with lawlessness. Now, these laws that Noah was following, this thing that made him righteous, right? The laws that Noah gets given are a set of laws for the children of Noah, right? Which refers to all of humanity, which was given to Noah after the flood. To summarize, it's a promise from God to all mankind that he will never kill all life by flood again, right? Now, the flood narrative is a deluge that covered the whole world, killing every surface-dwelling creature except Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives, and the animals taken on board Noah's Ark. According to this, all modern humans are descendants of Noah. Thus the name Noahide laws refer to the laws that apply to all of humanity. So after the flood, God seals a covenant with Noah with the following admonitions. Before I go there, now this is typically said that these Noahide laws, the Jews must impose this on the world and they will enslave the Gentiles under these laws. Just like Christians are going to enslave the world under the Ten Commandments, right? Now, of course, Christianity is not a religion of law, right? It doesn't impose legislation. So unfortunately, it has no legal system to impose. These are moral laws, things like thou shalt not murder. I'm not sure how that's a particular problem for people, right? However, even the Jews have reinterpreted their understanding over time. There's been numerous adjustments to how Jews interpret, and one of the interesting things is that when you read some of the wisdom of the rabbis, right, you do learn that they state that mankind got better through time. His understanding of God, his behavior became more civilized, and they realized that the whole point of the law of God was to move towards justice, to move away from things like an eye for an eye. Now, Islam literally takes that literally, okay? Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Within Judaism, for a long time ago, it became a completely different understanding. There was no literal violence. Eventually, they spoke about financial compensation. Islam, there is still stoning to death, okay? Even though you can find this in the Bible, this is not something the Jews have practiced for a long time, because again they said man moves towards development, towards justice, and better justice is not brutal justice of that type. Okay, now a clever effort, I believe, to get Christians to violate, right, so a clever effort to get Christians to violate the first three of the Ten Commandments and to adopt what I believe is Islamically required hatred of Jews. So this okay, when they make you dislike the the laws of Noah, when they try to misrepresent the Ten Commandments and the laws of Noah, this means that you are actually going to violate the first three of the Ten Commandments, which effectively mean that you do not misuse the name of God. Do not use the name of your Lord, the Lord your God, in vain. Do not insult God. And this effectively makes you turn around and do just that. It's a way of tricking you into doing exactly that. So, okay, I'll move to this here. References to Noah in biblical and religious literature. So, in addition to the book of Genesis, Noah is mentioned in the first book of Chronicles. Noah, the sons of Noah, were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and in the Deuterocanonical books of Tobit, Wisdom, Sirach, 2 Esdras, and 4 Maccabees. Now, of course, here's where Protestants come to me and say, well, did you know the Catholics added books to the Bible? It's like, yeah, they did that 1,500 years before the Protestants removed those books from the Bible. So yeah, they did it a long time before you guys were around. And I say that tongue in cheek because, again, I'm a Protestant. I'm a Anglican. That's Church of England. So, but that's just a historical point. Okay. I do separate myself from that in the sense that I don't think I'm hysterical about this, as some people I meet are. So, in the New Testament, we see, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. That's Matthew. In Luke, as it was in the days of Noah. Again, the same. And in the Epistle to the Hebrews, Noah is mentioned. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. And in 1 Peter, there were those who were formerly disobedient, right? And then Noah is saved. Now, Noah is treated with respect and accorded the title of being a righteous man in the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? He's spoken of well. So the question is, why would people then want to turn around and claim that the covenant that God left with him is evil, is designed to enslave the world, is designed to bring evil into the world? So I think this is a question they need to ask themselves. So now, man would be disobedient according to what laws or standards that God held them to. If they were going to be killed, then there had to be a standard they were being held to. But now, God did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness. So if he preached, what was he preaching? So, question, what divine law and covenants existed before Moses? Harry, hopefully I've clarified, I've set a premise and a foundation. Is that clear?
Very clear. Thank you. I understand that you're referring to the law system as the natural law before Moses, before Noah.
Pretty much, yeah. But also, you see, is natural law derived from God? Because remember, if there is no God, then there is no natural law. There's only Darwinian law. There is only survival of the fittest, right? Then might is right. So what divine law and covenants existed before Moses? Let's ask. So divine law existed before Moses, namely the covenant with Adam, the covenant with Noah, and the covenant with Abraham. Okay? For instance, the divine decree to circumcise males on the 8th day, that's for Jewish males, was part of divine law, part of the covenant with Abraham. So we have laws that were passed, that were put in place prior to the advent of Moses. So in Thomas Aquinas notes that the divine law prior to Christ, the old law, was more like a heightened natural law clarified for sinners. So now you've got an allusion and a reference to natural law, just more explicit. Rather than just conscience, you now have a written set of rules. So the new law is inward and transformative because the new law includes the Holy Spirit. Now that's from the Christian perspective, right? St. Paul also teaches that the divine law of the old law was shadowy and mediated by angels and thus inferior, but in Christ is the fullness, right? So St. Paul taught that the old law is now fulfilled in Christ. So you've got this older law, but now you have a new set of rules. So, okay, fine. The covenant of circumcision. Let's have a look at that. So when Abraham was 99, the Lord appeared to him and said, I will make a covenant between me and you. Right? He says, I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and your descendants after you for generations to come. Right? To be your God and the God of your descendants after you, the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. This is one of many places where God says that he will hold the Jews as his chosen people, and again this makes people lose their minds, but it says that the land is theirs and that they are special to him in perpetuity. Now of course you've got lots of people, well, that's a story for another day. God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep your covenant, right? Every male among you shall be circumcised. It'll be the sign of the covenants between me and you. Now understand, you can have one covenant with Jews and another covenant with Gentiles. These covenants are between a particular person or a particular group, right? This one is an everlasting covenant, right? Between Abraham, who's the father of the Jews in this case, right? So did he not say to now, let's have a look, conscience and natural law. Old Testament and New Testament references. Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I've done this. That's in Genesis 20 verse 5. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. So without getting to the details of the story, we have here reference to knowing what is right and wrong within your heart, which means that there is the concept of natural law, at least within Christian beliefs, Jewish beliefs, there's the concept of natural law, right? And God recognizes this. So I've done this with a clear conscience. I know you did this with a clear conscience, just as a rephrasing of that in a different translation. Okay, the NIV versus the New King James. Now, let's look at God's views on adultery and sexual immorality. Joseph was tempted by the advances of Potiphar's wife, but he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house. Right? There's no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" The point is to say here that, again, there was no Ten Commandments at that time. Right? There was no written law. So clearly there was some kind of law. Maybe there was a set of rules, again, a standard that he was working against. So Joseph was aware adultery is a sin almost 250 years before the law was given to Israel through Moses at Mount Sinai. So the whole long story is that I want you to understand that there are laws, there were rules in place long before the covenant of Moses was set. So clearly there are certain laws, and the 7 laws of Noah are the most explicit, clearest expression of these laws that God wants us to follow from long before the time of Moses. Interesting, right? During the Israelites' travel to the Promised Land, right, God gets a little upset with the Jews, and he says to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws?" And again, this is prior to God giving him the tablets, right? So again, he says, so clearly so the Jewish rabbis read this and they go, clearly this implies there was some kind of law in effect. Not all of it was written, right? So there's a tradition there. There's something that was part and parcel of the culture that wasn't explicitly written. Now, we do understand photocopiers were in short supply in 1400 BC, right? I've got George Orwell did he send me a message? I have no idea what that means. Okay, so as I said, photocopiers were in short supply, so we don't have a lot of written examples, but there's something implied within these texts. So where the laws of Noah were not explicitly written, they had to go and figure out, look, based on the context, how can we take this and do an exegesis of this and figure out what are these actual laws? Okay, again, whether they will walk in my law or not, again, prior to the 10 Commandments. They speak of the iniquity and abominations committed by the Canaanites, right? Against what standard are those things wrong? And then, of course, in Leviticus, do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. What are these ordinances? Now, unfortunately, some of the chapters of the Bible, obviously going back into antiquity, don't have the detail. And this is where some of the ability to create confusion comes in, because someone's going to show me that. But unfortunately, going back into antiquity, you're not going to get that level of resolution. So God says, keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live. Right? So Abraham obeyed, okay, and he kept my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So I think that clarifies this issue. Okay? Now, the 10 Commandments were enforced, therefore, long before Moses. So long before they were written, the laws were in effect. Now, what commandments and laws did Abraham obey if there were no 10 Commandments? But clearly, these commandments are universal. They're eternal. The law which Abraham kept was not the Mosaic law. That was given by God only after 430 years. Right? So these laws, according to the understanding that we have of the Bible, is that these laws were enforced from the time of creation. This was the natural law. So the 10 Commandments were not in any way limited to the Jews. It was applicable to the entire human race, and they were in effect before Moses or Israel. Now, they are the foundation of God's law, okay, according to standard Christian doctrine. 1, how to love God. The first 4 commandments explain how to love and to show respect to God. And 2, how to love your neighbor. The last 6 of the 10 commandments are how to love your neighbor, how to be a good neighbor. Now, Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness. That's Paul, Romans 2, 14 and 15. Of course, the implication being, again, this is natural law, something that's within our conscience, things that we would consider to be right. Now, Noah was considered righteous according to what laws exactly? What laws were the unrighteous breaking? And what was the law before Moses? Right. So I just want to make note that the laws of Noah have a precedent, and the Ten Commandments have a precedent, and therefore there's this synergy between them. As I said, 5 of these laws are explicitly, some would say 6, are an integral and explicit part of the Ten Commandments. So any comments from you before I go on, Harry? I just wanted to set that baseline there.
No, it's just very, very interesting that basically the Noah law and the Moses law are just descriptive of natural law, which existed since creation. So I think you established that point very well.
Yeah, I wanted to kill that point dead, because I really wanted to show there's a depth of information within the Bible that explains this, and many people will count on your ignorance, right? Will count on your lack of detailed knowledge to just bamboozle you with, or when I say you, I mean in general, not you specifically, to bamboozle people and state that the Jews are doing something evil, but really this is something that is part and parcel of God's word, so therefore they're trying to then smear the word of God, which actually violates the Ten Commandments. Okay? So that's what I wanted to get across. So I'm going to skip a small section. Now, the Book of Jubilees. Again, this is deuterocanonical. In the 20th Jubilee, Noah began to enjoin upon his sons' the ordinances and commandments, and all the judgments that he knew, and he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness. So Noah was not only righteous, he preached righteousness. He was an example of righteousness. He taught others how to be righteous. And he taught them how to cover the shame of their flesh. This is why this was considered shameful, to be naked in public, all right, to be naked in front of others. And of course, this is why when Noah got drunk and fell asleep naked for everyone to see, this was considered a sin. That was the standard of the day then. He taught them to bless their Creator, hence the first, as I said, 4 of the Ten Commandments teach you how to respect and love God. And then honor father and mother and love your neighbor. Again, that's an allusion to the Ten Commandments, right? The last 6. Guard their souls from fornication and uncleanness and iniquity. Now, the Book of Jubilees is not, as I said, canonical, it's deuterocanonical. However, notice how it tries to expand upon this and explains some of these things, right? And it gives a fairly, I mean, this is actually, this doesn't in any way deviate from the standard Orthodox view of the Bible, right? So guard their souls from fornication and uncleanness. So in other words, we can assume then that fornication, right, is not considered righteous. That adultery, okay, sexual immorality is not considered righteous. For owing to these 3 things, came the flood upon the earth. For whoso sheddeth man's blood, and whoso eateth the blood of any flesh, shall be destroyed from the earth. So now we're starting to get a bit more detail, okay? Those who shed blood. Now, remember, God does, for various reasons, does command that the righteous shall fight and shall slay the unrighteous, right? Now, it does state that this is one of the things, but it doesn't talk about, sorry, my nose is itching. It doesn't talk about murder. It's talking about, this is talking about murder. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, this is murder. And whoso eateth the blood of any flesh. Now, remember I mentioned the discussion of, you shall not eat the flesh torn from a living animal and drink its blood. Okay? That's vampirism. That's brutality and torture. Now, the Book of Jubilees is an ancient Jewish religious work of 50 chapters, considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as well as by Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, which is known as the Book of Division. Jubilees is considered one of the pseudepigrapha by Protestant, Roman Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox churches. It's also not canonical within Judaism outside of the Ethiopian Jews, but it is well known to early Christians, okay, from Epiphanius, Justin Martyr, Origen, and so on, and so on, and so on, okay? And the text was also utilized by the community that originally collected the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it has a long history. So hence it was considered deuterocanonical, but obviously it's not considered part of the main canon. So we have to ask, are there laws for Abraham? Were there laws for Adam? And by extension, the rabbis would come to that conclusion. They say yes. Now notice that Noah also appears in the Quran in Surah 71, 7, 1, and 21. And in Leviticus, you shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances. And that I've stated before. And actually, this is considered, now, aside, and I'll come to this another time in the future, but people will say that, oh, if you read the Torah, the Jews are supposed to kill you. This is an actual statement. They will make the claim that it is, that the Jews are supposed to murder people, and it's insane. When you actually go into the Talmud, Okay, because it says, the Talmud says, when you actually go into the Talmud, the Jews state that anyone who does this is a righteous man. Anyone who does this actually is considered like a high priest. Okay, if they would just bother to read to the end of the sentence, they would actually find the answer to their claim. But that's not the point. They're not trying to be truthful. They're trying to smear. They're trying to slander. Okay, so natural law is implied. Okay, we look at Psalm 119, 142. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. So you talked about the Logos here, and God's righteousness is everlasting. In other words, it's been from the beginning, always has been, always will be, which means there was some sort of natural law, at least according to the Judeo-Christian conception of the world and morality, that this is the case. Okay, the King James Version, if we look at Strong's H6666, in the following manner: righteousness, justice, right, righteous, acts moderately, righteously. Right? So what you've got is this idea of an everlasting righteousness, means it has severe connotations of correctness, of morality. Right? Righteousness in government, righteousness of the ruler, the king, righteousness in the law, justice, righteousness of God's attributes, righteousness in your causes, righteousness in truth, being ethically right and being vindicated, being justified, and having salvation. Okay, righteousness within God and the prosperity of the people. The righteous people will prosper, and righteous acts, which would be your morals. So this is definitely a connotation of things that are good, things that are very deeply moral. Okay, now notice, as I mentioned, the seventh law of Noah is that the Gentiles and the Jews have to establish courts of justice. And the Jews, as the receivers, as the witnesses to God, as the ones who received God's word, are supposed to teach this, supposed to pass this on to the Gentiles, those who are not the receivers of God's word. Right? They're supposed to proselytize. Now remember, Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. They're not to turn you into Jews. This is not the whole point of Judaism. Christianity does that. Islam does that. By the way, Islam, evangelization is a thing within Christianity. Okay, to evangelize, to spread the good news, the gospel, right? The Great Commission, the great work. In Islam, dawah has multiple meanings. One of its meanings is a legal matter, a legal case, a legal action, right? Other meanings of dawah, which people typically use for evangelization, it is not an equivalent to evangelization. Dawah has meanings of propaganda. In fact, the main meaning, the dominant meaning of dawah is propaganda, with a side helping of, I won't say deception, but pretense. So the definition of dawah is propaganda and pretense. It also means call or invitation. If I go, hey Harry, do you want to join me for a beer or some whiskey? That's an invitation. Understand? The Islamic idea of dawah as an invitation is not, excuse me, good sir, do you have a minute to listen to the good news about our Lord Jesus Christ? It's, hey, how about a beer and some hot dogs? That is when dawah speaks about invitation. It means that as well. Whereas evangelization doesn't mean, hey man, let me tell you about my hot dogs and my cool cold brewski here. I'll pause there for a moment. Any comments from you, Harry?
I would like to see if we have any questions. Yeah, raise
I'm
your
going to
hand
nibble
if
on
you
some
have a question
ginger.
Guys, questions or comments? No? Go ahead, please.
Okay, is all of this making sense so far?
Of course. It's very clear.
Okay, now, the seventh law of Noah is that the Jews, not to evangelize, right? As I said, it's not an evangelizing religion, unlike Christianity should be. However, and it's not a propagandistically evangelizing, it's not even evangelization, it's just propaganda with pretense, right? You can find a definition in the Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 13. It'll, and then you can go from there. It'll give you the references to the longer passages in the main encyclopedia itself, and it's hysterically funny. It's all about propaganda. It's all about government state propaganda, which is hysterical. But the seventh law is to teach the Gentiles to establish courts of justice. And of course, here's where the hysterical start to say, oh, but they're going to use these courts to screw you over and take away your rights and eat your babies and drink their blood. All fine and well. But then again, that means that they're lying to you about what is actually in the Bible, what is the basic Christian Orthodox understanding of the words of these terms within the Bible, because God is not just a God of hippies skipping through the valley, shedding rainbows and flowers and butterflies wherever he goes. He's also a God of law and a God of justice. Justice is not always about coming down on Christmas and giving you a bicycle. Sometimes justice is about, unfortunately, taking action against the wicked, right? So notice that one of the connotations here, in terms of what is righteous, in terms of judgment, you have justice, ordinance. Ordinance is a law, regulation, right? Judgment, act of deciding a case. Place, court, seat of judgment. Process, procedure, litigation before judges. So Jews would we function without a court system? Would we function without a legal system? Would we be able to sort things out in a sophisticated, civilized manner? No, because if there were no system of law, if there were no rule of law, you would have chaos, you'd have barbarity, you would have the law of the jungle. You'd go back to the 1st century, you go back to antiquity, and there would simply be who's got the biggest guns, the most bullets, and the biggest army, right? Case, cause, presented for judgment, sentence, decision of judgment, execution of judgment, time of judgment, justice, right, rectitude. And again, the attributes of God or man. Ordinance, decision in law. So obviously this is that something should your customs should be proper, right? But also your laws should be righteous. Your judges should act righteously. Your law should be righteous and moral, based upon your understanding of God's law, right? Based on an application, because there's the common saying, as I've said before, that politics is downstream from culture, which people love to say, and yes, that's true, but also culture is downstream from religion, which is the part that they keep forgetting to mention, right? And of course, Islam, we know what Islam, because, Islamic law is downstream from Islam, and Islamic culture, well, in politics, we know what that's like, right? But also, as we forget the moral root of our culture, we stray from the law. Look what's happening in the US now. All of these justices and lawyers, DAs that are letting people walk free, no bail, no charges, and they're free to commit the same crimes the very next day, because they've got this twisted idea that the crimes that someone commits is not their fault. It's the fault of society, because society was not perfect, and therefore society is to blame for turning out this bad person who wasn't given enough hugs, right? They fail to take into account, they dismiss the idea that everyone is responsible for their own actions. And of course, when there's no punishment, there's no boundary, there's no enforcement, you are simply rewarding people for bad behavior, and they will consistently escalate, because violent crimes, violence has one essential nature: it escalates. Yes, Harry?
Do you see a connection with what you just described again to the Gnostic philosophy?
Very likely so. Look, remember, the Gnostics are anti-Christian. They're anti-logos, right? Now, this is not necessarily anti-Christian, but they're anti-logos. They're against God, because they see God as an evil God, right, who usurped the power of the righteous God, right? So they've inverted. There's this moral inversion. So yes, certainly that would be the case. They believe that enacting the law would be acting to enforce the rule of the demiurge, the evil god, the Satan. And they need to invert this, because, yes, so the short answer is yes. Do you see that yourself?
Yeah, I see that already.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm trying to really do this in detail to give people this context, that there's plenty of evidence, there's an overwhelming. And when I do these presentations, there's so much material I have to leave out. It's incredible how much information I have to leave out, to try and summarize and simplify what I have. It's just the mountain of things that I leave out is so much more than what I actually include. So let's have a basic overview of the 7 laws. The 7 laws of Noah are biblical prohibitions from God against 1, denying or cursing God. Now, of course, if the 7 laws of Noah are evil, then of course it should be good to deny God. It should be good to curse God. If you're one of those people in the chat who loves to call the 7 laws of Noah evil and satanic, I would love to hear you defend that. 2, worshipping idols. So do you recommend worshipping idols? 3, murder. Please stand up and explain how you are pro-murder. 4, adultery and sexual immorality. Well, I think we do understand. If you look at the Cuomo brothers, they are definitely for adultery and sexual immorality. For a start, theft. Okay, theft. I hope we all can agree that theft is wrong, except if you look at Democrat-run cities like Los Angeles and other places. Organized group theft is a thing now. Okay, and of course, God's against theft. Right? Does that clarify for you, Harry? I mean, if you look at what's happening in Democrat-run cities now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Each one of them.
Yep. Eating flesh torn from a living animal and drinking blood. Now, if this is evil and satanic, how many rats and mice do you kill in your off days, right? In your weekends and evenings? Because as you know, people who go and kill little animals while they're alive to watch them die are called psychopaths. This is a known trait within psychopaths. So I guess, okay, if you're pro-psychopathy, well, just let us know so we know to call someone to keep an eye on you. Right? And the obligation to establish courts of justice. That's the final one. Now notice, God also wants justice because God is a God of justice. He's not just a God of giving you bicycles on Christmas. All right? He's also a God of justice. 6 of these laws are exegetically derived from Genesis, right? The book of Genesis. The 7th is the establishment of courts of justice. This is actually spoken of in the book of Romans under Paul. I will touch on that later. 5 of these laws are repeated in the 10 Commandments. So 5 of these laws are word for word taken from the 10 Commandments. 9 of the 10 Commandments are repeated and renewed in the New Testament. Okay? So the commandments that are repeated and renewed in the New Testament are considered. So effectively, the New Testament, the New Commandment, Jesus comes down, right? And you've got the old laws now passed away. You have a new. He's fulfilled the law. The contract is done, right? This covenant is done. However, these moral laws are carried over. The only one which differs is, and it actually might appear later within the New Testament if I recall, but as I recall, the thou shalt keep the Sabbath. Okay, this is not reinforced in the New Testament, right? So, and I don't think it's not that you shouldn't have a holy day. It's just we don't have to keep the Friday that was the Sabbath for the Jews, or we don't have to keep a particular day. Just have a day, but which day? That was cultural or something like that. I think that's the only difference. But 9 of the 10 are explicitly repeated and renewed in the New Testament, so that these laws carry over. Now, the New Testament does quote the Old Testament more than 855 times, because obviously the New Testament scholars were, with the exception of Luke, were all Jews, and therefore there were especially Paul, who was highly trained as a rabbinical student and was set to become the chief rabbi. So he was an expert in the Jewish law. So obviously he writes from that perspective. He understands that they grew up with what we call today the Old Testament, right? It's obviously the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, and so on. So the law and the prophets. He grew up with those scrolls, so he knew what was in them, right? And they applied these ideas. These moral laws were applied forward into the New Testament. Now, the Covenant of Noah applies to all of humanity and all living creatures. Now, so that's this here, okay? Applies to all of humanity, right? These are not meant to be imposed by the barrel of a gun, okay? But I think someone not stealing my stuffs, I think that's a pretty good thing. I've had my stuff stolen. I did not enjoy it, okay? Yeah. So yeah. If you've ever had someone sleep with your girlfriend, you might. Or your wife, you might think that maybe adultery and sexual immorality aren't such a great thing when it happens to you. So, let's all just, keep it in the pants, right? So, yeah. So anyway, so this applies to humanity and all living creatures. This would seem to me to be natural law. In this covenant, God promises never again to destroy all life on earth by flood. He creates the rainbow as the sign of this everlasting covenant. Tell me, what is the rainbow used for today, Harry?
Men love, gay parades.
Gay
Fun,
parades, sexual immorality, kiddie fiddling. We all know it's all going towards kiddie fiddling in a big way. So yeah, so this is, understand, this is a religious law. This is a religious war. It's a moral war. These people may claim to be secular. They may claim not to believe in God, but they're very, 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 very busy undermining God. They're very, very busy specifically attacking the law of God, even the basic laws, the most basic fundamentals of what we would consider just natural law. The rainbow has even been corrupted. It's been co-opted. And yeah, we have to realize these people are at war. And maybe in the background, they actually look, because often you've got a huge group of followers and you've got a group of leaders who set the doctrine, who set the tone. That message filters down, and these people might be true believers. They might be nutcases, but they're true believers. And the thing is, look, whatever they believe doesn't have to be true. They just have to believe it. Okay? It doesn't have to be true. They just have to believe it. So, everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. So, from Christian doctrine, right, this would be, and even in fact from a Jewish perspective, because this is within the Torah, right, this is a sign of the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature. So if you're going to say, but the Jews want this for everybody, well, blame God, because that was his doing, right? So now Yahweh gave a covenant to Moses, and that covenant contained 3 types of rules: moral, civil, and ceremonial. That's another Martin Luther thing I've got to get into one day. Man, I think about Martin Luther, I just want to punch the guy in the face. So, only the moral rules are eternal. Okay? 3 types of rules: moral, civil, and ceremonial. Only the moral rules are eternal. God the Son replaced the Mosaic covenant with the new covenant. Now, from a Christian point of view, not necessarily a Jewish point of view, of course. Right? The latter covenant has no civil or ceremonial rules at all. So Christianity doesn't legislate parking tickets. Okay? Now, have you ever studied the Bible? You would understand that Yahweh has made and replaced many covenants with human beings over the centuries. As I've said, there have been many, many covenants. These are not necessarily all permanent. Only the moral rules are eternal. Okay? When God said, you see those baby fiddlers and those kitty diddlers over there? Those guys that are sacrificing their kids to Moloch, go kill them. That was not an eternal commandment to kill everyone in sight. Lots of people would like to misinterpret the Bible deliberately in the most uncharitable manner, but that is not an orthodox view by any means. That is entirely a false, deliberately propagandistic, deceptive view. Now, the laws of Noah are referenced in Genesis 9:4-6. As I said, to repeat, a prohibition on murder, eating living flesh, and drinking blood, and courts of law. Now, someone might say, but there's no references to drinking blood. Yes, there are plenty in the Bible. It actually recurs. So there is a reason, there actually is justification for this within the context of the Bible. Okay? And courts of law. Now, the Torah or laws of Moses were not given yet. They derived from God's commands addressed to Adam and to Noah. So the laws of Noah are derived from the rules that are thought to be given to Adam and Noah, who are the progenitors of all mankind, and they are thus regarded as universal. So that's the reason. So the reason is not because the Jews are baby-eating crazies who want to take over the world and enslave you. It's because God provided these laws, and it's assumed by the best scholars of the Bible that these ideas are incumbent upon all mankind and should be taught to all mankind. We should all follow these rules. Okay? It's not about trying to make you do something crazy. It's about trying to say, look, these things are what make a civilized human being. Okay? So 5 of the laws of Noah are in the 10 commandments, which are built on the foundations of the 7 laws with additional commandments. Now, the earliest complete rabbinic version of the 7 laws can be found in what's called the Tosefta. The Tosefta is a compilation of the Jewish oral law. Remember I said that Moses spent 40 days up there with God. Now there are 10 commandments, so either it took it took Moses, 4 days to chisel out one of the rules at a time, right, of the 10 commandments, or God just dictated very, very slowly, or God finished the tablets in a couple of seconds and then said, hey, you and I have a chat about the future of mankind, and they spent 40 days talking about something, which became the oral law. Okay, so this is a compilation of the Jewish oral law from the late 2nd century, the period of the Mishnah. I'll get into that in the future. Now, observance of these 7 laws is not a Jewish requirement. It's a requirement of the God of the Bible. The Jews are simply trying to make this something that you're aware of. Okay, it doesn't conflict in any way with Christian doctrine either. So these are 7 ancient law that people view as the basis of civilized society. Thou shalt not murder. I think it's a pretty good idea. They govern morality and represent the bare minimum of what God expects of humanity. They're called the Noahide laws because they are thought to have been given in their fullness to Noah after the flood. They're also called the Noachian laws, the 7 laws of Noah, or the 7 commands for Noah's sons. And in Hebrew, it's the Sheva mitzvot b'nai Noach. Did I say that well, Harry?
שבע מצוות של בני נוח.
Sheva mitzvot b'nai Noach.
Yes.
Well, there you go. So, yeah, I hope Mossad's listening and they send me that check, because, man, it's nearing Christmas, you know. I have presents to buy, damn it. So, the idea of a formal set of laws... I know. They yeah. Last year they paid me in jelly beans. The idea of a formal set of laws given to all of humanity comes from the Talmud. Oddly enough, and I know people hate the Talmud, and we're going to dive into the Talmud in depth in the near future, previously people lost their minds. It was incredible. And is therefore extra-biblical. So these formal set of laws, okay, it is considered extra-biblical because it's not explicitly stated in the Bible, right? Whereas it is explicitly written outside of the Bible in extra-biblical text. So the Book of Jubilees contains the mention of the Noahide laws, but then the Book of Jubilees is deuterocanonical. It's not considered inspired scripture, right? However, these 7 laws are based in biblical principles. So I wanted to put forward this entire argument so that everything's very, very clear, right? So now there's another rabbinic tradition that describes the commandments that would have been derived logically even if God had not included them in the Torah, right? The Torah is the 5 books of Moses, by the way. Okay, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. You must keep my rulings, right? These are the items which are written in the Torah, right? Which, if they had not been written, should have been. Okay, these are prohibitions against robbery, illicit sexuality, idolatry, cursing God, and bloodshed, right? So, again, natural. So all of the evidence, all of the discussion by various Jewish groups, by various Christian groups, by various commenters on the Bible within the standard orthodoxy is that all of this talks about universal natural morality. Okay, so the idea of the Jews wanting to teach these laws, right? Remember, it's not a proselytizing religion, but they have to, it's part of their duty, part of their responsibilities as witnesses to God, just as Christians are the Great Commission to make everyone, you know, Christian. You can also then say that the Christians want to enslave you under Christianity, but I mean, you know, you can get hysterical about anything if you try, and if you're a leftist, you will. Okay. So understand, so here's Maimonides on this, a very well-known Jewish scholar, okay? Also someone that also said a few odd things in some of his books that people love to pick on, but then of course they ignore the nice things he said. 6 items were commanded to Adam concerning idolatry, blasphemy, bloodshed, illicit sexuality, theft, and laws God added to Noah, the law of not eating from the flesh of a live animal. Maybe this is something the Canaanites are doing. Maybe it's something the Babylonians are doing. Maybe animal sacrifices of this type or brutality of this type, it was common then, and thus God said, hey, that's a bad idea. I personally agree with that. I think that's a bad idea. I don't want to be ripping the legs of puppies and then eating it and drinking their blood. So that's pretty gruesome. Okay, that's in Maimonides, the Laws of Kings 9:1. Okay, so short version, the association of these laws with Adam as well implies they were established as part of the creation of the natural world. So I'll pause there for a moment. Comments, thoughts?
I'm sorry, the presentation is fantastic. Everything is so clear. I personally don't have questions. Let's see if the audience have any. People, please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment or a thank you. No, people are quiet. Continue, please.
Excuse me.
Take your time.
Sorry. So, understand, I could have just used this verse and that verse, and there you go, Bob's your uncle, 5 minutes. I wanted to go into detail to show there's so much overlapping evidence. There's so many sources that all say the same thing. So the corroboration by multiple sources tells us this is legitimate. This is the orthodox view. This is the standard view. This is why we arrived at this view, right? The only people who seem to dissent are hysterical idiots in the YouTube comment section. That's been my experience. Okay, so Now, the word covenant is mentioned in these 5 books of Moses, right? Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, Exodus, and Deuteroscopy mention covenant 58 times. These days, I can't see the word Deuteronomy without thinking of the word Deuteroscopy because of the Boom Boom Room series by David Wood and his friends. So with thee I will establish my covenant. Okay? To purify or cleanse signifies properly a purification or purifier, because in all covenants made between God and man, sin and sinfulness was supposed to be on man's side, and God could not enter into any covenant or engagement without a purifier. Hence, in covenants, a sacrifice was offered for the removal of offenses. So God would enter into a covenant, an agreement, and the man would make a sacrifice, right? Which would, the scapegoat, right? Which would take his sin, and the sacrifice would then receive that sin, right? And this would reconcile God to the sinner. So you'd cleanse yourself of the sin, and then God could make that covenant. Of course, within Christian doctrine, Jesus became that sacrifice and cleansed us of sin, meaning we now had a clear path to salvation, a clear path to God. That's the difference in understanding. So, we've got a covenant, but there's also a sacrifice offered on the occasion. Now, a covenant is a disposition of good things. This is within Genesis 6:18. A covenant is a disposition of good things faithfully declared, as arising from his grace towards Noah and all men, but implying also conditions on man's part, and therefore is called our covenant. Right? So there's, again, this air of morality and righteousness to a covenant, but also responsibility. And God said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, the word covenant appears in the Old Testament, okay, in Genesis to Deuteronomy 58 times, in Deuteronomy 4 to... anyway, there's hundreds of mentions of covenants, as you can see in this list here. Okay, in these books, 58, 56, 56, 54, 59, and up to Hebrews, from Malachi to Hebrews, 27. Right? So what is a covenant? So if we look at Strong's, H1285, you have covenant 264 times. You have the word league 17 times, confederacy once, confederate once, and confederate with another word once. So let's see. Covenant, alliance, pledge between men, a treaty, an alliance, a league, constitution, ordinance. Ordinance is law. So understand, again, the agreement that man will establish courts of justice. We've spoken about the moral overtones, that this will be righteous justice, but also there will be justice. There will be law. There will be the rule of law. Right? There will be the application of the law. Alliance, alliance of friendship, alliance of marriage. Okay? And then covenant, a design ordinance. So understand that's just a little bit of the background on the meaning of covenant, on the context of covenant. So now let's briefly speak about government, right? Covenant violations, yeah. So from who needs government? Genesis 8:21, and when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. So Noah makes a covenant with God. He makes a sacrifice. The sacrifice is good, and therefore God forms an agreement. But of course man doesn't keep his agreement because man is not perfect. Okay? So from here we learn, from this verse, we learn the fundamental reason why God makes covenants with men. Okay? The imagination of man's heart is evil. And so obviously we are taught that we are all sinners, we all fall short of the glory of God. We're not perfect. Of course, again, from a leftist perspective, they believe in the perfection of man. The Nazis believe in the perfection of man. The Sufis, the Muslims, believe in the perfection of man. Right? And of course, whenever people pursue the perfect man to become like God, they commit evil. I mean, the communists believe in the perfection of man as well. In fact, the remaking of man in the image of man, not in the image of God. So again, all of these, what's interesting, many of these supposedly secular doctrines that do not believe in God, all of them actively and purposefully work against God. Very, very, very interesting. Right? And, okay, no, I'm going to skip that piece. That's fine. So, what about covenant violations? The decapitation concept is biblical. He shall be avenged. Exodus 21:20. Now, this is from Sepharia.org, which is a very interesting book. It's a website on the Talmud. I do not know what this vengeance is referring to when it says and I will bring upon you the sword, avenging the vengeance of the covenant, Leviticus. You must say that vengeance is decapitation by the sword. Nose itching again. So, now people talk about, but we're supposed to decapitate people, we're supposed to do things like this, we're supposed to do things like that. Okay, this is an old covenant. This is no longer a valid covenant. The Jews don't do this, and I will get into that in more detail. Christians don't do this because Christianity doesn't legislate law. A Christian who goes and decapitates people, that is not Christian doctrine. That is simply violence, and that is evil, and that is punishable by law under secular law, right? That is a violation of Christian doctrine. It is not following any kind of doctrine. And of course, you don't regularly see Jews running around on London Bridge, killing people, beheading people. That's something Muslims do because that's part of their law. They've retained this law. They've retained these barbaric aspects of the law. As I said, the Jews have, over the years, adapted and changed these things and always tried to move towards greater justice. That's part of the Jewish idea. We must move towards greater justice. We must move to being more civilized all the time. So, the Jewish commentary relates to Leviticus, okay? It says that the covenant violations must be avenged with the swords. However, the Jews write that it's not stabbing, and a quick beheading is the least cruel and painful way to go about it. Now, that's an interesting comment, okay? So, they speak here of decapitation by the sword. So, there's a bit of a historical story here. If you were a Gentile and you lived in Jewish-controlled lands, okay, you were living under Jewish law, and you committed a capital crime, as a Gentile, you were decapitated. That was the ancient understanding. Jews, within their own law, have 4 different punishments. Okay, this would be drowning, choking, burning, and stoning. Okay, beheading was not part of the Jewish punishment upon Jews. And of course, decapitation, being killed, this was normal. It's a normal part of capital law. It's been a normal capital punishment. It's been a normal part of the way that people conducted, the law throughout history. The reason that Jews chose beheading for Gentiles is that it is the quickest and the least cruel and the least painful way of killing someone who's committed a capital crime. The beheading was one swift stroke with a sword and done. Pardon me. Whereas, at least according to the old law, a Jew could be burned, which is incredibly painful and can take some time. A Jew can be stoned, which is incredibly painful and takes time. A Jew can be drowned, can be very long and unpleasant. And a Jew can be, what was the one I mentioned? Burned, stoned, drowned, and choked to death. Okay? So you'd have a rope around your neck and they would choke you to death. Understand, this was because Jews were held to a higher standard. They should hold themselves to a higher moral standard, at least in the understanding of the time. Now, the fact that it's historical doesn't mean that it's something that is valid today. It is as the sages taught, it is written with regards to the sentencing of murderers, and these shall be for you a statute of justice for your generations in all your dwelling places. That's in Numbers. From which we learn that the mitzvah to establish a Sanhedrin is in effect both in Israel and outside Israel. So this is their understanding of Numbers 35:29. So the Jews now within the Talmud are making an understanding that a Sanhedrin, a council, right, is required for the Jews. And also they already understand that laws and an establishment of courts of justice must be established outside. Now, obviously people are going to utilize the most uncharitable understanding of this, right, which is very, very typical anyway, but I've discussed that already. So yeah, so this is how this is interpreted. I wanted to bring that up because it's relevant, okay, within courts of justice, because this is something that is utilized to try and smear the idea, because look, courts of justice, I think a rule of law is necessary. The rule of law should be righteous. It should be something based on good natural law, should be something based on law that is moral, right? And of course, when things go wrong, you can't say, well, when they are, justice on its own is not bad. If someone murders my friends, I want justice, right? If someone murders my wife, I want justice. If someone kills my child, I want justice. Law on its own, justice, courts, they're not bad in and of themselves. And I know there are people that have argued that, but that is just naivete. We need this because you need to have some kind of civilization, some kind of standard. Right, so any comments on that, Harry, before I waffle on?
I actually have a different question, if I may, about the same subject.
Like, what's the orbital velocity of the moon? I don't know the answer to that.
No, I don't understand what is why the opposition is so against the Noach 7.
Because we must hate the Jews at any cost, and even if we have to lose our tiny little minds.
But there is absolutely nothing wrong with the 7 laws.
See, that's where you're using logic. You see, you're confusing people with logic here. You see, the problem is you're confusing people with the facts, Harry. Don't confuse people with the facts.
I apologize. I will not do it again. Okay,
yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, so understand. I mean, so I'm trying to give a really, I haven't done this in like 2 years, right? I haven't really done this in depth, well, maybe a year or more, but I mean, I haven't done this in depth for about 2 years now. So, but understand, there's nothing that, as far as I can tell, and I'm looking through various sources now, obviously, people just have their own thing. So I'm trying to really, really tackle all of these concerns and issues and claims that people make and try to make sense of them, to show that there's some kind of logical sense behind all of this. Now let's go back into Chabad, because as you know, they're as evil as the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? So a Gentile who worships false gods is liable, provided he worships them in an accepted manner. So there was actually religious tolerance within for Gentiles living under Jewish rule. And a Gentile is executed for every type of foreign worship which a Jewish court would consider worthy of capital punishment. However, a Gentile is not executed for a type of foreign worship which a Jewish court would not deem worthy of capital punishment. So they're saying here, look, there needs to be some moderation here, okay? Nevertheless, even though a Gentile will not be executed for these forms of worship, he is forbidden to engage in all of them. Okay, so rather prevention is better than cure. Fine. Okay, so that doesn't look like a bloodthirsty sect. Now, on this point, people then go, when I talk about the rule of law, they say, well, but the Jews are bloodthirsty, they want to kill everybody, and when they impose their law, they're going to murder you. Well, okay. The nation of Israel doesn't have capital punishment on its books. Israel, in 72 years of its existence, has only provided capital punishment to 2 people. One of those was a Nazi that it caught, okay, and that Nazi was tried and then hanged. And the other was a Jewish soldier, I believe, who was accused of, could have been treason or something, but it turned out they were mistaken, and his sentence was commuted posthumously, sadly. And so if a country is not bloodthirsty, right, it's not going to be applying capital punishment willy-nilly, and Israel does not do that, right? It clearly does not do that. It interprets these laws very, very differently today than 3,000 years ago, because you'll notice we're not living in 5,000 BC, whereas if you go to Saudi Arabia, you're going to see at least what's known 200 beheadings in the town square every year. You will see people stoned to death in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia. People are still being stoned to death today. But of course we shouldn't say that, Lloyd, because that's racist and we have to blame the Jews even though they don't do it, and let's find something we can be hysterical about. And that's exactly my point. Now, notice what's said in the Talmud, that evil Talmud. Let's have a look at, because now we've now proven, I believe, that the 7 laws of Noah are evil. Right, Harry?
Yes, very, very
convincingly. Right? Now let's look at this evil Talmud on how they're going to be killing everybody left and right. A Sanhedrin that executes a transgressor once in 7 years is characterized as a destructive tribunal. So now in 70 years, that means the Israelis should have killed at least 10 people in capital punishment. They haven't. Since the Sanhedrin would subject the testimony to exacting scrutiny, it was extremely rare for a defendant to be executed. That's so weird. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says this categorization applies to Sanhedrin that executes a transgressor once every 70 years. So now this guy says, hold on, a destructive tribunal, a violent, out-of-control tribunal, commits capital punishment once every 70 years. This is far too bloodthirsty for this guy. Right, so understand this is a very different idea than people put forward about what's supposedly in this evil Talmud. Now, I'm not defending the Talmud by saying it's Holy Scripture, it's not. Okay, I'm not saying there isn't some weirdness to be found about the rabbis, because man, if you look, you can find it. There's some weird stuff in this Talmud, but if you've read Sharia law, this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. Sharia law will make you puke. You will toss your cookies all over your pants. Believe me, you'll throw up because it's disgusting. If we had been members of the Sanhedrin, we would have conducted trials in a manner whereby no person would have ever been executed. And that's Rabbi Akiva. This is the main man. This is the man in terms of, this is like the Moses of the rabbis, right? I mean, this is the big guy, right? Rabbi Akiva, right? So very highly respected, considered the senior rabbi, the respected rabbi. So he says, if we had been members of the Sanhedrin, we would have conducted trials in a manner whereby no person would have ever been executed. This is not evidence of being bloodthirsty. This is evidence of people looking towards justice and non-violent justice. Let's look at a different book. So 789, a Sanhedrin that executes once in 7 years. Same book, sorry, different passage. That executes once in 7 years is destructive, right? And this applies to a Sanhedrin that executes once in 70 years. Okay, so understand you've again got this issue. People are saying this is not right. Okay, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Tarfon and Akiva said if we had been members of the Sanhedrin, we would have conducted trials in a manner where no person would ever have been executed. Okay, this is the original here. You can see within it's on Sefaria.org, Makot 7a, verse passage 10. Okay, so yeah, now of course within the discussion, okay, of capital law within the Talmud. Now there is a section on capital law being discussed within the Talmud, Sanhedrin 36b, right? It is very confusing to read. I've read it some time ago. It's been like 2-3 years since I've read it, so I cannot remember what's in there. But they do state that 23 judges are required. It's very hard to get the agreement of 23 judges to decide to kill someone. How do you get 23 judges on board? You don't. Understand, they said one guy can't do it, 2 guys can't do it, 3 guys aren't enough. How do you bear the responsibility of putting someone to death? They wanted a lot of people to really have this problem ironed out. Again, they did not consider this a trivial, unimportant exercise. Okay? So, now what you've got in Islam is rule-based thinking. Whereas you've got very principle-based thinking within the Talmud. These are people that really think about their law very carefully. They're trying to follow their principles. But in Islam, you've got rule-based thinking. If this, then that, which is very, very Islamic. The Talmud is the opposite of that. In fact, the Sharia is the Islamic Talmud. And it's an inversion, quite a literal inversion in many, many ways. And we will get into the Talmud in the future, and I will cover that. I will demonstrate that. Let's have a quick look again. The death penalty in Israel. The death penalty has been carried out only twice in Israel's history. The most famous was Adolf Eichmann, the senior SS officer, and the leading architect of the Holocaust, was executed by hanging in 1962 after his trial. The case was shortly after Israel's establishment in 1948, when army officer Meir Tobiansky was executed for treason. The other case was in 1948, when Meir Tobiansky was executed for treason after a court-martial in which he had no legal representation. Tobiansky was posthumously exonerated and reburied in a military ceremony with full honors. Several other death sentences have been handed down over the years, but none carried out. If you've got crazy, wild, bloodthirsty Israelis, then they simply are doing it very, very wrong. Current Israeli law allows for the death penalty under very limited circumstances. These include crimes related to Holocaust, which is unlikely today, and treason committed by a soldier during wartime. The Israeli Knesset voted in 1954 to abolish the death penalty for murder. Interesting. Okay, again, if they're murderous, bloodthirsty people, then it's odd that they did that. Technically, Palestinian terrorism is liable for capital punishment under Israeli law, but Israel has never executed a Palestinian terrorist convicted at trial. We've spoken about the Nazi Palestinians in the past. I don't want to rehash that now today, and I'll leave it at that. So can I drop this here now, and we pick this up again next week? I can take some questions, Harry. Would that be all right?
Of course. Yeah. I'm not sure if we are going to have questions. The audiences are very quiet tonight.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm boring them to death with too many facts, but but I really wanted to clarify this from every possible angle.
No, I think the presentation is perfect. It's the best we can hope for. Naif wants to speak, so
Sure.
Naif, go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's a lot to take in and to ask valid questions back when you're getting thrown this information. You know, that's why we're quiet. That's why I'm quiet anyway. It's kind of, but it makes sense at the same time. And the references to natural law. Yeah, it's a very interesting, factual.
Appreciate it. Am I going too fast? Because many people tell me that by the time that they've processed what I've just said, because it's so new or just it goes against what they've been conditioned to believe all this time.
Yeah,
I'm already 2 points further down the road, and they're trying to catch up. Is this,
yeah, I think that's my issue with it. But that's not your fault. That's my fault. But it's not too quick. It's just time to think, look into things, to be able to provide feedback and ask questions even.
Right. Everything that I've said, this entire presentation that you're seeing now is publicly available. I've given the link to Harry.
Yeah.
And you can go, everything you see here that I've done is available for everyone to go and review and check for themselves. None of this is I make it all publicly available. So what have you learned from this, and what has changed about your views given what I've said today?
What you said today, well, I'm not sure if anything's changed in my views. I've learned a lot. I didn't know much about the Talmud, to be honest. I'm not, as I say, this is an education, so I can't always question.
Okay.
But the references back to natural law and what you're getting at in terms of that in the first part of the presentation, I can relate to that a lot.
Yeah, so I think
I've learned a lot about Islam, and I've learned, so.
Yeah, you will find there are distinct differences between the Talmud, Talmudic law, and Islamic law. The differences are vast. It's insane what Sharia is like. So I think most of the polemic against the Talmud. Again, I'm not defending the Talmud. I'm not a Jew. I don't work for Mossad. Mossad, if you're listening, that check is late. It's nearly Christmas, guys. Okay. So where was I going with that? Is that people are trying to play on ignorance, right? Play on people's ignorance, convince them that the Jews are evil, the Talmud's evil, etc. There are certainly problems we can highlight, but for another day. But they're trying to turn people against natural law. They're trying to turn people against the law of God because they want to impose their own outside morality, their own communist morality, or whatever it is, right? So if they can make you think that this is evil, then of course they can make you do entirely stupid things, because you were rejecting God's 10 Commandments. As a Christian, I'm going to have to, obviously my bias is in favor of this. It's 10 Commandments. It seems pretty logical to me. Don't murder people. I'd say that's a fairly good idea. Don't steal things. I like my stuff. I worked hard for it. So yeah, but people are literally trying to invert your morality, and they may or may not be aware of what they're doing.
Lloyd, I wonder, and I'm probably wrong about the premise, but because I'm not a specialist on the Bible, but if I'm not mistaken, Jesus himself criticized very harshly the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are the ones responsible for the Talmud. They are the leading rabbinical system.
That is true.
So he basically considered them as like the devil's children or something like that.
Yeah, look, the thing is, I don't want to get into that without having references in front of me, because what I do find is that sometimes the argument was very specific. It was pointed at a particular group, right? It wasn't necessarily all those Israelis must die. My name is Jesus and you will all go to hell, okay? Because that is the approach that a lot of hysterical people want to bring, right? That's the perspective a lot of people want to bring, whereas many times the accusation is more focused on a specific group within a given context. Like he often speaks of the Sanhedrin. He says to the rulers, the leaders, he calls them, or maybe those that are there to support them. He speaks to that group, not all of them, right? Because otherwise you'd be condemning the innocent, right? But anyway, until I can get into, have some notes and discuss it. But yes, he does call certain other rabbis snakes, and they believe, for instance, there's the belief that they will find salvation, that they will go to heaven based on being, what's the word? Being picky, particular, being nitpicky about ceremonial law. And he says the ceremonial law will not get you to heaven, right? Like, for instance, the ceremonial law of washing your hands before having bread. And Jesus does. There is the discussion that the works of the law, right, which is considered the ceremony. Remember, there was the moral law, the civil law, and the ceremonial law. Now, some of these people were far too focused on the ceremonial law, thinking that this set them apart, made them righteous, and would earn them salvation. And he was, in many cases, stating that following this ceremonial law is not relevant. God doesn't care. Are you moral? Are you righteous? Your focus is in the wrong place. Does that help to at least answer some of that?
Yes, very much. Are you going to speak about that in greater details in the future?
That's a subject I would need to dig into a little bit. I mean, I have touched on it. For instance, I mean, but then again, this also comes back to this guy that I really, the more I read about him, the more I research him, the less I like him, Martin Luther. That actually does tie into that, because Paul discusses it, I think, in Romans 3, I can't remember the exact verse, 3:9, I'm not sure, where Paul says, we're saved by faith and not works. And Protestants, and again, I'm a Protestant, so whatever, where this is commonly said that you were saved by faith and not works, right? They paraphrase this or partially quote that, but that full sentence is, you're not saved by works of the law, right? Paul actually states works of the law, which would be ceremonial law, works of ceremonial law, because Paul's being actually very particular as an expert in Jewish law. Then if you look at the only other source, I have it in my notes, I'm not going to go there right now, okay? But the only other source of a discussion of the works of the law, which clarifies what they are, is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is in a particular scroll from the Essenes, where they write a letter, where the leader of the Essene group actually writes a letter to one of the senior people in Jerusalem, and he tells the Pharisees, he writes a letter to the senior Pharisee, and he says, you guys are doing the ceremonial law wrong. Let me clarify for you how to do it, you idiots. So this is the only other document from antiquity, besides Paul's writings, which discusses the works of the law, and they actually lay it out. So now we know that these are things like washing your hands before eating bread, and Jesus says, this is so, and like you washed your hands, like how does that earn you righteousness? How does that earn you the kingdom of God? Right? So unfortunately, this is something that is a minefield, and I'd like to get my facts together before I speak in more depth on that. Does that help?
Yes, of course. Any other questions, guys? Please raise your hand if you have a question. No? It seems like you will be able to go to sleep early tonight. I would just like to emphasize again that the presentation was incredible as usual. And I personally, like Naif said, I really like the connection you made to natural law. This is something we are researching in the group. It's very important for us. And you established the foundations very well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. As I said, there's so much information that I had to exclude. It's just amazing the mountain that you leave out, because you just need to summarize somehow,
Yes. Okay, so next week we are going to continue with Noah laws, or are we?
Yeah, we'll continue. I'd like to finish this. I'd like to actually go through this in depth, because I really want to clarify this. I want to go through, because I want to go into more detail on the correlation between the laws of Noah and the Ten Commandments in explicitly, and as you can see here, in deep detail. I also want to talk about older codes of law, because people says, well, the Babylonians actually had a code of law which involved, and there was stolen, whatever. Sorry, so basically I want to go through some older codes of law which shows that the Ten Commandments and the Jewish idea of the laws of Noah were far more advanced and very different to the laws, the codes of law, because God wouldn't have given the Jews this code of law if it existed already amongst the peoples, right, who God considered unrighteous. So clearly, this code was not, well, I mean, assuming you believe in God, assuming you believe in the Bible, of course, but this code did not exist, because you had a very different society then, and of course this change by introducing these laws, changed society. Okay, the Code of Hammurabi, no, it's not similar. People love to say that Jesus was based on earlier, nonsense. Okay, so anyway, so I want to go into a whole bunch of stuff. So the detail of the Ten Commandments, and then talk about the Ten Commandments, and of course the rabbinic, I wouldn't say rabbinic, but the Jewish, some of it's rabbinical, definitely. I mean, the rabbis don't only produce nonsense, right? So I want to go into some of the Jewish texts and within the Talmud, and how they exegete even further the Ten Commandments, how they expand upon them. Like, for instance, if we go to theft, okay, like people are familiar with do not steal, okay, that's great. Do not steal, do not rob, do not overcharge. That is theft. See, this is now a deeper exegesis. Do not kidnap, do not move a landmark to confuse people. Right? Do not use false weights and measurements. Like, your scales must be accurate. So in all things you must be righteous, and do not covet. This is all considered theft. Right? No incest, no bestiality, no homosexuality. And then, of course, eating flesh of living animals, prevention of animal cruelty. Do not eat an animal while it's alive. Understand, if the rabbis are crazy, wild, insane people, and probably some of them are, I've seen some weirdos on YouTube, that's for sure. But if in general they're crazy people, this is a very rational set of laws for having been produced by insane people. Now, justice, the one thing that, because once I've demolished the other 6 arguments, then they go, it's justice, and that's why I harped on that somewhat. Because the justice laws, the rabbis exegete this as, you must be against bribery. There must be no favoritism. You must try to be impartial. You must not condemn the innocent. You must administer the death penalty, but notice they don't want to administer the death penalty. And treat people equally before the law. These are the foundations of Western law, the Magna Carta, the American Constitution, just common sense. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yes.
So I'll go into much more depth and detail, and add a few other things on top of this.
That's good. Thank you very much. And I would like to mention that the show notes are available on the wall. They are pinned to the wall, so it's available to everyone. And we are going to see Lloyd again next Monday at 8 p.m. UK time.
Yeah, guys. So especially without
Lloyd.
the interaction, I'm talking for very long. It hurts the throat, and I've got a busy week. I have some private clients this week, so I need to, unfortunately, took on some extra work. So yeah, that's it from me. Unless there's anything last minute, but I hope that was enlightening and useful to you guys. And I shall see you guys in a week.
Yes. Take good care, and God bless you, and see you soon.
Yeah, take care, Lord. Thank you.
Most welcome. Take care, guys. Bye.